it actually recommends to them using AI for this doctor and this type of procedure. Here's they're the top 3 scopes that they normally use. And here is the one that is closest to hitting that 7-day or 14-day limit. Go grab this one. So it actually helps them to rotate the stock properly too.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we will speak with Sunil Mandava. He's the founder and CEO of Mobile Aspects. He is a subject matter expert in applications of RFID in the healthcare space. And Hayes, today we'll be talking a lot about best practices, and he'll give us some examples of applications of the technology as well and how it can transform the healthcare organization.
Yeah, if your organization is not using RFID, you need to listen, learn what he's trying to do and what they're doing, rather, and it is really, really fascinating. So stick around and enjoy.
We'll be right back with Sunil Mandava. Stay with us. Just a short break ahead.
Bam! I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
We are speaking now with Sunil Mandava, CEO and founder of Mobile Aspects, and we're going to be talking about all things RFID. We have not talked about the application of this particular technology and how it can improve supply chain yet here on the Power Supply podcast. And I actually saw Sunil present at my home ARM chapter, Southeastern Pennsylvania, or CPAC. And Sunil, you did just such a great job of talking about practical applications of RFID. I think you did a great job of outlining like good places to start and then what can be accomplished as you get more sophisticated in applying those technologies. You just got a great roadmap for adoption. And so we're really happy to have you on the show today. And I wanted to welcome you. I know you've been on some of our other sister podcasts, but you've never been on Power Supply. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me onto the podcast. I'm excited to talk to you and, get the word out to some of your listeners about RFID is an incredible technology. It has a lot of applications. There's a lot of different ways that our customers are thinking about using it, not only what we're doing, but with other, companies and other applications. So happy to talk with you and everyone today.
Happy to have you here, and I'm expecting good things, big things, from you. You've already been on a couple other podcasts, so we're expecting a lot of good information today.
I have. I'm a podcast veteran now because of you guys. So thank you.
I love it.
Sound great.
Maybe you can teach Gary a thing or two.
Old dog, new tricks. Let's go. Let's roll.
Sunil, why don't we start by just setting the table with what is RFID, at least in terms of healthcare application, and what are the most common current applications of RFID before we sort of get into the potential and where they can take it, kind of anchor around how they might have seen it in practice, even if they weren't involved with the implementations.
Sure. So RFID, literally it stands for radio frequency identification. The application that we talk about outside of healthcare the most is Easy Pass, or those transponders that are on your car that before we had to stop, get a ticket, on the other side, give the ticket, give change, all of that type of stuff. And we're in line for a long time I remember going on the Verrazano Bridge when I was dating my college sweetheart, now my wife, in New York, going to, visit her there, and being on that Verrazano Bridge in New York for like an hour trying to get through there. Now when we go, you just drive in, drive out, like no time. That is the power of RFID. It can identify things and lots of things and just speed up commerce transactions, capturing, items. So it's an incredible technology. There's a lot of great uses in healthcare, tracking all the things that move around a hospital, whether it's people or items. That's probably the biggest application in healthcare. And there's a lot of subtleties, to that from there.
Yeah, I'd seen it used quite a bit with like biomedical equipment, patient beds, just kind of knowing where some of that larger inventory is. But I have seen, smaller inventory applications for RFID now. And sometimes the hospital's like looking at, what's the cost of implementing the sensors and how do you calculate ROI? Are those the kinds of common conversations that you're having as sort of like everybody understands the power that the technology could bring, but is making sort of that return on investment argument a struggle for many folks?
Yeah, I think they know, the hospitals and the employees and the people looking at it know it's really powerful. It can do a lot for them, but it's kind of like artificial intelligence where you hear about it, it's out there, the buzzwords and all these applications are there, but once you start to investigate it, it can start to get quite messy in terms of what's the best application for our organization or our department. That's kind of where I see a lot of hospitals are at, is like they know they want to use it, but what's the best way for us to get value out of it and what's the best application for us?
Well, the technology's been around for a long time.
Long time.
All right. So how is it, let's say in the last 5 years, 6 years, how has that evolved? How much better is it than it was 5, 6, 8 years ago? Can you give us a little understanding of that?
Sure. I think it's always been, it's literally was invented in the 1960s. Anything identification like this, who's going to invent that? It's going to be the military. They used it in the 1960s to identify, is that a friendly aircraft or not a friendly aircraft to us? That was the origination of RFID in the first place. It's evolved, and those are big, big items and, whatever. Of course, an F-1, fighter jet, or all those different fighter jets are gigantic items. Now we're tracking medium-sized items inside a hospital down to tiny little, we're doing specimen tracking biopsies and all of those types of things in a hospital also. So it's improved dramatically in terms of the size of it, the read range of it, what it can actually track. There's a lot of improvements in the actual tracking technology there. But probably the biggest improvement is just different organizations and people and hospitals thinking about what's the best application of it, because RFID is great, but it's the software and the application and how you're going to use it and how you're going to implement it. That's the real power of the technology.
Sunil, it seems to me it's a way to save loss in my mind. And tell me if I'm tracking as well as our end users. I know Hayes always wonders if I'm on board or not. So I'm thinking about I do a total hip initiative, a total knee, a total joint initiative, and you have instruments and trays that are worth sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can have the best consignment inventory, you can have the best audit inventory. If one of those gets lost, that's significant dollars to the bottom line. Where do they go? How do they come in? Is that an example of where this is being utilized? I know we talked about it way in the past, but to the point where we are in the technology now, is that an accurate direction?
Yeah, the screws and the instruments that are used in the actual procedure, the actual implants that are used in the procedure, all of these items are things that hospitals are, the clinical providers are so focused on the patient. They got into patient care to care for the patient, not to necessarily document things that are used or not used, etc. However, that's all very important to do. The business of healthcare is now the hardest part of healthcare. The different things that we can do to help the patient are amazing today, but the business operations are what are really hard for a hospital today. So RFID can really help with a lot of those business operations.
And I think about going down that lane. You talked about mission. Thank you. Supporting our patients and everybody staying in their lane where they should be. I think about red waste, like instrument tracking. How much loss? And there's tons of loss there too. That's another RFID application, correct?
Absolutely. One of the things that we do, we started working with University of Pennsylvania on this a few years ago, is flexible scopes. So flexible scopes are used all the time for minimally invasive surgery. They can grab biopsies. They can see inside your body really well. They're incredible, like Swiss Army knives for the hospital. They are $25,000 to $125,000 instruments or machines that the hospital uses. I have heard many instances where they lose one, and then when they go looking for it, they find it in the red trash can, the biohazard, waste can. So that's part of one of the things that we do is we make sure the hospital knows exactly where they are, who they're used on. There's a lot of safety issues. You're reusing that scope on patient after patient after patient. You have to know who it's used on in case there is an issue with one of them, and you need to go and talk to the 17 patients that it was used on after a patient 0, if you will.
There's also like certain guidelines around how often they have to be reprocessed, even if they weren't used. And I've seen applications, and I'm sure you've been involved in this in the use case you were just talking about, Sunil, but where they're actually able to track when it's time for the scope to be reprocessed, even without a use. And that takes a toll on the inventory or on the device each time, because it's usually going through some sort of high level chemical disinfectant, right? So making sure that they're rotating stock. I mean, that's something that we think about a lot is maybe on the supply and logistics side, you think about that. I used to work at a grocery store, and you always had to pull the older stock up front. But in a lot of cases with surgery, we don't necessarily rotate the use of the equipment to spread that out. And so you're effectively, subjecting the scope to reprocessing unnecessarily if it doesn't get used within that window. And while you may be using the same scope that gets hung up in the cabinet in front, and that's the one that goes. Is that a similar kind of application for making sure that you're rotating stock well?
That's a very good application. Our system, it actually, when the technician or the technologist or whomever it is removing the scope, when they walk up to one of our units and say, I need it for this patient, it actually recommends to them using AI for this doctor and this type of procedure. Here's they're the top 3 scopes that they normally use. And here is the one that is closest to hitting that 7-day or 14-day limit. Go grab this one. So it actually helps them to rotate the stock properly too.
It's a great use case.
Yeah, it's a great. I want to tie this. You brought up AI, so I'm going to tie this together. I feel like sometimes, like AI is only good if it has the right data in it. Because if you feed it the wrong data, obviously it can only draw insights off of whatever, it's getting. Also, getting data on utilization in hospitals, especially specific to a medical device, can be very difficult. And RFID, to your point around the documentation, it can get a lot of data points to help feed the AI engine to do the things that you're talking about, correct? So like as a health system, do you want to get more data points from RFID to help you enable AI and the potential of it? Because AI means so many different things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of AI here. We use it internally for our own operations internally. We apply it to our products, and customers are using it, just like I talked about in that prior example with recommending which scope to use. One of the things about AI, for sure, is the more information you feed it, it's not the smarter it gets, but the more accurate it gets in its recommendations, the better its recommendations get. RFID is constantly reading and providing data points. It's going to provide thousands to tens of thousands more data points than, for example, a barcode would, because it's always on and always reading. That's one of the major positive things for AI.
But Sunil, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have active tags and passive tags, correct?
Correct, right.
So are we talking, or in this conversation, are you primarily talking about active tags? And maybe what's the difference?
Yeah, so active tags and passive tags, those are two, I guess, categories of tags. Active tags are ones with batteries inside of them. They can read, there's pros and cons. They can read over much longer ranges, like usually the Easy Pass transponder that's in your car or Toll Pass or whatever it might be called. That is reading from tens of feet away down to you in your car, wherever it is. So it needs a battery. Passive has no battery, so it doesn't read as far. The pros, I've talked about reading far away for that transponder or active. The cons are that's a lot more expensive. That's $35 to $50 versus 3.5 cents to 50 cents for a passive tag. So it's just orders of magnitude different in economies.
So depending on maybe capital equipment or some of that things, we would go with an active tag in a hospital system, right?
Correct, yeah. If you need to actively locate something anywhere in a building, a facility, a hospital, wherever it might be, most likely active is the solution. If I just want to generally know, did it go into this area? Did it go through this process? Not go through this process? Active is overkill, and passive is usually a good solution for that. Generally, it depends. I mean, it depends, but generally those are good kind of gates to kind of help you decide which way to go.
So just as a clarifier, the specimen piece, would that be like a passive?
It would be a passive. They want to know, when was it put into the refrigerator? When was it picked up from the refrigerator? When did it get to pathology? Those types of things. They don't necessarily need to know that it currently is in this area right now, because they're good at putting them away and then picking them up and all of that type of stuff. Is it just done in a very timely fashion? Do we have records of it, of the chain of custody along the way? All of those types of things.
Sunil, I want one more clarifying question, and Hayes teed it up. Justin asked the next question. One of the things I remember is we used to clean pumps with supply chain and EVS and wipe them down, but EMS needed them to transport a patient. What's the limitations? Can it track on an EMS ambulance going to another location, or does it have to be in a certain area? I'm curious when it stops, when it starts. I'm just trying to think about our listeners on the base of knowledge where they're at. Maybe walk through that a little bit, but we found a lot of those missing pumps finally on EMS, but they needed for a patient. It's a good thing, but I just want to know how that works with that situation.
Yeah. So if you want to know where it is throughout a facility, let's start there before going outside the four walls, is it can be not only expensive for the batteries that go into the active RFID tag, but then you have to start to install the infrastructure throughout the hospital to track and receive all of those signals that are coming through. So you're digging up ceilings and putting that throughout. And there are very good applications of that. You might have to track certain types of patients. You might have to track certain types of very expensive equipment throughout the hospital where it makes sense. And there is a financial return on investment for that. Going into an ambulance, well, then the ambulance would need to be outfitted with something to be able to pick that up too. And as you probably know pretty well, the ambulances are not part of the hospital,
Correct.
organization. They are their own organization.
Yeah, and we'll come back, Justin, but my mind's just going from air transport to ground transport to BLS to ALS, emergency transport. I'm trying to figure out how that segue moves into that. And that's probably a whole nother podcast that we can get into.
Right.
Yeah.
We actually have an application where we have one of our hospitals, University of Pennsylvania, where they were, many years ago, they were losing ProPack heart devices. The ambulance would use one, then they'd come and grab two of them from the facility. That was kind of common practice for hospitals and the ambulances. They didn't know who would take them and all of these types of things. They actually attached RFID tags to the Pro Packs. They put them into our systems that they were using to track implants and other inventory. Now they knew exactly which ambulance was taken, which Pro Pack, and they would make sure those are returned before they give them the next one. They told us the use case was amazing. We used to lose 2 or 3 or 4 a year. They're $30,000 to $40,000 a piece. They're like, we haven't lost one since we implemented your system.
Nice.
Wow.
Making the CFO very happy. Right?
Yes, and everything in a hospital, as you all know, is about, is there a financial return on investment or not? There's okay, it's going to help patient safety. That's great. How is it going to help? Are we going to at least break even, if not bring some positive financial result to our organization?
And always, you take it back. Some of that capital equipment could be tied to an embedded lease. And all of a sudden they do an audit and inventory and you're 10 short.
Yep.
What's the vendor going to say? No problem. Go ahead.
Right, exactly.
Where's our inventory? Could be millions of dollars involved in there. Yep.
Exactly.
What are some of the more creative applications of RFID that you've seen?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of people using it a lot of different ways. On the very positive side, I've seen for newborn monitoring and making sure that, they're staying in the unit. For Alzheimer's cases, that people can wander, using it, and dementia, using it for that. I think those are some great applications of it. One of the more creative ones.
I can tell you a story about that. That's huge.
Go ahead.
I mean, I worked at a nursing home once. I've worked at several, but earlier in my career. And like you said, on the Alzheimer's units, but it doesn't mean the doors aren't opening and closing. And they do escape the unit sometimes. And there was actually one situation at the place that I had worked at where somebody got out late evening and it got dark and they were not able to find them before it was too late. And you can imagine, like, that's a very sad occurrence for, obviously the family, but it has a big impact on, the workers as well. And so I think that application is really strong, that, you get door alerts sometimes, but if the staff are like in the middle of another sort of emergency or complicated situation, they don't always have eyes on. And to really have like the RFID tracking to then have an alarm go off and then somebody to be able to know where that person went or is before they exit the premises, I think is really huge. I don't know how common that is in the long-term care setting, but it should be a best practice in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure it happens more than we know. And then, some of the other more creative ones too are, I thought this was a great one, especially as we were in the middle and coming out of the pandemic, it was an application of RFID to make sure that people in the hospital were not only washing their hands, but washing them for the full 30 seconds. So for hand hygiene control, they called it. And it was apparently very effective. I don't think too many hospitals implement it, but as I was traveling, I saw that at a few hospitals too.
It's a great use case too. I mean, everybody.
So Sunil, I'm thinking about a current situation, and we've had purchase services, EVS, laundry and linen as previous podcasters. Scrubs. Can you RFID scrubs?
You could. I mean, you can absolutely we put RFID tags on flexible endoscopes. We put a special coating on it to go through the harsh chemical environment for high-level disinfection. So you can absolutely affix a specialized laundry tag to scrubs and have them go through that process also.
That is a significant loss, especially how that works. And those things walk a lot. And so there's a lot of dollars involved there, especially multi-million-dollar. That's laundry linen's huge.
Yeah, they literally walk, right? You see people walking out of the hospital wearing scrubs all the time. Yeah.
In fact, I've got a neighbor. I will not say his name or who he works for, but he works for a medical device company. And I kid you not, there's not a week goes by that I don't see him walking around in scrubs, complete scrubs. And I'm like, dude, how many scrubs? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. How many hundreds of pairs has he gone through I've known him for about 8-9 years.
Residents especially are famous for taking them home and using them as their, pajamas or their comfy clothes at home or, whatever it is, things like that for sure.
I have to admit, I might have a pair or two myself from back in the day.
So, Sunil, let's say somebody's like maybe thinking of a scenario or an application for RFID, just based on some of the examples that you gave, how it can be leveraged. What are some questions that they need to ask themselves to sort of determine if it really is a good opportunity for RFID? I mean, I'm sure people can reach out to you and pick your brain as well, but I just mean that quick self-assessment of like, is this situation meant for RFID? And if, and where those opportunities are, because I'm sure a lot of times, you're an expert on RFID, but I bet you have people come to you and say, can you solve this for us? And it's an application you never thought of, but the components of what would make a successful application of RFID are probably pretty consistent, aren't they?
Yeah, they'll be consistent. So it would start with, what are you having a problem that in identifying items or people, or you're having an issue in identifying it, and there is a significant impact to your organization, to your department, that you're not able to identify and track that. So you would start with that. And there's many of those things. Then I would say number 2 is, what is the impact of it? Is it small, medium size, or big? Both from let's take a financial point of view, risk point of view, and then operational excellence point of view. So those are probably the 3 big areas that you want to look at. I started my company when I was 23 years old, and I was a dumb young kid coming out of college, and I thought, it's all about patient safety when I'm talking to hospitals. I quickly learned that you can have the best patient safety application in the world. If there is not a financial benefit back to the organization, the answer will be no. So there has to be a financial pain point that when you want to go back internally to get it approved, that I can show you, I can project a return on investment here for the organization.
So that's a really good point you brought up. So if somebody from, Tulsa Medical Center called you today and said, hey, I want you to implement this where you think we could get the biggest bang for our buck the quickest. Mm-hmm. Typically, where is that? I'm
always going to say, because things are financially driven in a hospital, where in the hospital do you spend the most money, and where in the hospital do you make the most money? All right, so in your experience, where would that be? That's going to be your operating rooms, cath labs, electrophysiology makes a lot of money, radiology,
Yep.
gastroenterology makes a lot of money. These types of areas spend and make a lot of money.
They keep the doors open.
Yeah, they keep the doors open for a lot of the other areas. They're not the only money makers, but they're some of the bigger money makers, within the hospital. I talked about on another podcast with you guys, I'm a survivor. I was a cancer patient. Cancer centers make and spend. They get donated a lot of money, but they also get reimbursed a lot. But man, do they spend a lot of money because their treatments are so expensive. They just are. I was $1 million patient, type of thing. They are just extremely expensive treatments that you have to go through, and all the instruments and everything that they have are extremely expensive also. So that's, if anybody was thinking about it in a hospital, I would say, where do you make and spend the most money? That's where there's the opportunity to either make more money or save on the spending of money.
I got to think a lot of the ROI too, there's like an element that's soft savings in terms of how much time are you saving a clinician for documentation, to use one of your earlier examples, which definitely applies in the operating room and all those other procedural areas that are driving the highest revenue. Is there an adoption factor to calculating that, like people's reluctance to leverage technology? And do you have a way of sort of calculating what the value of a clinician's time is to keep them focused on patient safety? Like, do you have a way of calculating that for hospitals?
We absolutely do. We will do a little bit of time and motion study. We'll gather inputs during an interview process with customers as we're kind of assessing how are they doing things today, where can they improve. It is a consultative type of process where, yes, it is a product and you don't want to do customization and those types of things, but you do have to make sure you're solving their most important, issues, and you're implementing it in a way that will solve those big issues. So where our doctors are the most expensive people in the hospital, where are they spending a lot of time? We had one facility, Mass General, who the chair of neuroradiology came back to us and said, Sunil, you have no idea how much time you save us. I might implant 15 to 20 to 25 coils into a patient for an aneurysm. I have to go back and document every single one of those. Your system just plugs that into our electronic medical record for us, and it saves me 20 to 30 minutes per patient. That's a huge amount of time for those physicians up there.
The downstream for that too, of all the people supporting that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, huge time savings, increase in accuracy. It's all the things that we also want AI, to do. Kind of going back to that that's the power of AI as we're implementing it inside of our organization. The same people can do a lot more work than they did before because AI is doing 80% of the work for them and they're just doing the final touches on it. And the information is a lot more accurate and powerful. That's kind of what RFID can do for tracking and documenting of things in a hospital or people in a hospital or resources in a hospital.
All right, as we wrap up, what's one thing that we didn't discuss today that everybody should know about RFID before we close this out?
So there's a lot to RFID. I would say the biggest, probably one thing about RFID that people need to know about is don't worry so much about the technology, active versus passive. Don't worry so much about, am I using UHF or HF, or there's another one called LF, low frequency. That will matter later, but just think about more, what's my use case? Is there a potential improvement? And you want to check off all three of the boxes: operational efficiency, risk, and patient safety, like we talked about before. And the financial ROI has to be there. You want to check off all of those boxes. Then you start talking to people and vendors about, what have you done this? What have you done before? We're thinking about implementing it, in this way, and have them come in and do a visit. They're happy to visit, to talk with you and review your operations before deciding on which path and where you want to go.
Excellent. Sunil, you are absolutely an expert, and you did not disappoint after I saw you present at that local ARM chapter. And obviously, we've talked many years ago on one of our other podcasts. You did a great job today, and I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate the time with you guys.
That was Sunil Mandava. He is the CEO and founder of Mobile Aspects. We found out, Gary, he's been doing this since he was 23 years old. So definitely an expert in RFID and applications. And I thought he really, kind of nailed it there. I liked at the end where he said, if it checks off these 4 boxes, to move forward. I think with just the amount of bandwidth that healthcare supply chain has, if you're going to move forward with a project like this, you got to know that there's an ROI and it's going to hit. And so just having some sort of practical ways to do that evaluation before you reach out and kind of get things started on a project like that is super wise. Obviously, as he mentioned, he and there's many others out there that can come in and kind of consult on those types of projects and say, hey, you know what, we've done that before. Or if I were to do that, this would be a best practice. And I think getting some consultation around that, removing the human effort, is something that we just are going to continuously be talking about in addition to AI applications.
100%. And Justin, I'm going to give props to you because you did get the great question and the soft savings in line with the RFID, not losing tracking of certain devices from biomed to instrument tracking. We talked about scrubs. The opportunity with RFID is only going to increase. And I think probably Justin gets the props today, Hayes, on the best question that Sunil was able to answer. But just that technology is moving forward, and we've got to encompass it and make it a part of our programs.
Yeah, 100%. And Sunil, great job today. Thanks for coming on. And on behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thank you all out there for listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.